Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Hello everybody and welcome back. You're listening to The Crypto Realm and I'm Deborah Hatswell and you're listening on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm afraid Ron can't be with us this week. He has some research that he has to do. So I'm bravely going to do this one on my own, so bear with me. There might be a few technical grumblings, but we will do our absolute best to bring you a fantastic show. And I'd like to speak to you about something that's quite close to my heart, and that's the strange creature report that come into me here at the UK and into other people. And what tends to happen is we get a report from an area, and as we add it to the map, we'll have a look and see if there have been any previous reports in that area. And if there have, or whether there have or there haven't, we tend to try and send a researcher out, if we can, into that area to have a look around. And fortunately, Andy McGrath's been in touch with me. You've heard me speak with Andy before from Beasts of Britain, and a gentleman called Hal Smith. And it gave me the idea for the show because Hal went out to an area where there had been 2 previous encounters of a very strange creature. And whilst there, he was approached by a gentleman who told him of another one, and that tends to be how they happen. And it's a very small town, believe it or not, in Dudley, close to Dudley in the West Midlands, which would be quite shocking to some people. But as you'll see as the broadcast goes on, there are a number of towns that are surrounded by green belt or areas of natural beauty, where you have these strange accounts of creatures reported by everyday citizens here in the UK. And some of you listeners will be those people, and some of you will be future people who see them with a bit of luck. And I'll start by talking, as I said, about Penn. And Penn's a little town in the Midlands. And a gentleman got in touch, and when he was about 15 or 16, he had a sighting when he was in the fields. And as most boys would tell you back then, it's quite natural for a lad to be out lamping at night or rabbiting or something like that. And that's what he was doing. And he was in his usual position in the field. And he'd done this a number of times before with his gun, and he had his torch to light the field up. And as he's scanning the light across the area, the torch picked up a crouching human-type figure, much bigger than an average human. And in the lad's words, it was huge in height and width. His friend promptly ran off, leaving him alone. So he followed suit and he legged it also. And he's older now, but still certain of what he saw. And he said it was not the normal thing you would see. It was not of this world. Now, Penn's a small mixture of homes with huge areas of fields and small woods leading to the Cotwell Nature Reserve in the Black Country. And this report came in by a lady called Karen Charlton, and she took the account from the witness and passed it on to me. And not so long ago, another gentleman got in touch with me, also from the area in Penn. And this was in May of this year, 2018. So that's why I thought that you would find it interesting. And he says, I guess you can help me decide what I saw after I tell you what happened. It was in early May of this year, and I was running late for work. So I decided to cut through the lanes towards Timber to pick up the A449 further down. I was down the back end of Lower Penn by Wolverhampton on a single track road called Showell Lane. And if anyone who wants to look that up on the Google Maps, it's Showell, Showell Lane in Penn. It's a single track road with woods and fields on both sides. And as you come to the bottom of the road, there's a few houses and an old, very overgrown footpath or public right-of-way access or something like that, a small track that's set back about 50 feet from the road. And it was when I got there, I saw what I first thought was a man in a hunting suit or a sniper suit with all this shaggy, hairy stuff, you know, like a ghillie suit that you see them in. But this was of an orangey colour, like a red setter dog, but a little bit lighter. then I noticed the sheer size and bulk of this thing. And I knew it couldn't be what I initially thought. It wasn't a man in a suit. Because this thing, I reckon, it was at least 7 feet tall and was massively thick around the chest. And it had shoulders like an American footballer with all the pads on. And I was quite a bit away from it as well. And it was sort of stepping back into the shade of the foliage and peeping out and stepping back. And it was scary. And to be honest, I'm 6 foot and 22 stone. And I've trained for years, but I felt scared. And I just floored it, which to be honest now I regret. After doing a bit of research, I found that there are quite a few sightings around the Midlands and the Shropshire area. And now what was fears turned more into a need to understand what I saw that morning. And that happens with a lot of people when they see something. And I'm incredibly grateful that you got in touch because, as I say, Andy McGrath realised that we had a researcher in the area that could probably go out and, have a scan of the area. And that's Hal Smith. And he did that. And he travelled to the location and he made it really easy for this elderly couple that he actually got in touch with to speak to him about it and what happened to him. And you can read it in Andy's blog. Andy calls it the Black Country Stalker, and you'll find that in a Beast of Britain blog. I'm going to read it out for you now. And it says, here is a sighting reported by Hal Smith. On Tuesday morning, Hal says, I was up on Baggeridge Ridge at around 9:30 when I saw an elderly gent walking his dog. He said good morning to me and he carried on down towards the car park. I finished around 10 and headed for the cafe. The gent was in there. I got a coffee and I sat down. After a while, he came over and sat down with me. And he pointed at my T-shirt, which actually said, Gone Squatching, and asked if I believed in it. And I said, yeah. I told him that I investigate sightings, and he said he'd something to tell me. But he wanted his wife to be present. So we arranged to meet back at the cafe on Thursday at 9. And that's what we did. I got there around 8:55 and they came about 9:15. And we sat and had a coffee and chatted in general. And I brought up the subject of the sightings. And the old fella said, not here, outside. And we left the cafe. They led me up a path that I know well, as I've put owl boxes up there 10 times previous. This area I call the horseshoe path, because it follows a tree line in like a half crescent moon shape. The path's only single file, and it's wide, single file wide, and it has trees on both sides. One side falls downhill, and the other side has a slight incline. It's very quiet there. Very few people use it as it's off the beaten track. We reached an area around about halfway around the trail, and then they told me what they had seen. One morning around 9:30 in April 2017, the elderly couple were out walking their little dog that they had, and they do that most mornings. They always choose this path as their dog does not get on well with other dogs. And it's very rare to see someone else walking a dog or anyone up there in general. So it's a place they like to take him. He can roam quite freely. And as they walked along, the man noticed a dark figure in the trees at about 30 feet away. He didn't say anything at first. He thought it was strange. And it seemed to be watching them from behind a tree. And whatever it was ducking in and out every couple of seconds or so. Every time it was noticed. The man decided not to say anything to his wife because he didn't want to alarm her. And they continued to walk. But the figure stayed pace with them and continued to try and remain hidden at the same time. After about 10 minutes had passed, the man's wife noticed he seemed anxious, and she asked him what the matter was. He told her, and he pointed the figure out, and she looked, and she eventually spotted it, and she saw it duck back in and start peeping at them from around the tree it was hiding behind. The dog then started barking and growling at it. They rushed as best they could, with the dog now on the lead, and eventually reached a fork in the path. And they knew that one way would take them back to the car park. And as they turned at the bottom of the path that leads out of the woods and onto open fields, they stopped to catch their breath. As they looked back from where they'd come from, the creature had stepped out onto the path. They both agreed it stood upright. It was very dark in colour and covered in hair. The wife said it was around 8 feet tall, but the gentleman said it was closer to 7. It didn't follow them any further. It just watched them as they walked away. When they got back to their car, and they don't walk that area anymore, they said. In fact, they rarely use Baggeridge car park. So our accidental meeting was a spot of good fortune. As I got the story, they have never told anyone before. And I was able to put their mind at rest that they'd nothing to fear from these animals, as there's never been any reports of anyone being harmed by anything here in the UK. And of course, they wish to remain anonymous. It's understandable. I have no reason to disbelieve the story. It just seemed very scared to me. And the elder lady had to keep wiping tears from her eyes. She was quite shook up. There's nothing fanciful in this report. It's just a couple walking a dog, as most people do, who see something incredibly strange. And if it hadn't been for the bat signal, you know, shining out of Hal's T-shirt in the village there, with his gone squatching tee on, and the old gentleman hadn't spotted it, we may never have heard of this encounter. And I wonder how many unheard of encounters there are in this area. Because this all happened within around about a 4-mile radius, these 3 sightings of this strange creature. And, I mean, to be honest, there's not far away that there are quite a lot of accounts. Staffordshire, Sutton Coldfield, that kind of area, there's a lot of strange creature reports. I'm not really sure why. But it's not the only town in the UK where a report has come in, and it's not the only report in that town. But would it surprise you to know that sometimes a report will come in and it will be on exactly the same road in exactly the same town? And this is what's happening in County Durham. We had a lady get in touch with us, and I'm going to call her Kay. And if you're in the Facebook group, you will be able to read this quite openly. But she doesn't want to be named on air, which is understandable. But in the group, you can see where she's got in touch, and she's asked me to help her understand something that she saw when she was much, much younger, when she was a girl. And it happened around 1974. And she said, I had a strange experience as a child, and I'd like to talk to you about it. I hope that's okay. And it's always okay. If anybody wants to get in touch with me and discuss any experience that they've had, feel free to do so, or we can sit down and have a chat. And this lady said, I was about 5 or 7 years old at the time, and I was on a local woods in Stanley, County Durham, and I was with some other children. They were about 13 years old then, and nice, sensible girls, and that's why I was allowed to go out with them. And where I lived, there were lots of fields and woods, but it wasn't remote or dense. It was an average town, really, with surrounding countryside. We were in a clearing, and I think there may have been a rope swing, but I do remember playing with the tree. I looked up into the tree, and high in the branches was a man, and he was crouched, holding a knife in his hand. He wasn't like a normal man, and I called him an ape man or a monkey man, and I still do. He reminded me of a caveman or a wild man in some way. I can't remember a lot of detail about his appearance. He had long, bushy, dark hair, and he wore no clothes. I pointed him out to the girls, and they looked up, but they said no one was there. And I ran from the woods crying in fear, with them chasing after me. They always insisted no one was there, but it would have helped me if they'd said I wasn't the only one to see it. I hoped they'd say it was someone dressed up, you know, and explain it away, but they never did. He wasn't like a Bigfoot so much, but he wasn't like a normal man either. I know for sure I definitely saw him, and it frightened me to think that they hadn't, and there was no explanation of who or what he was. Has anyone heard of anything like this? I looked at some images on Google, and the one I've included with the report seems to look really familiar. I'm going to go and speak to my parents and see if they can remember any additional information that I told them as a child. Now, little did we know at the time that in the same Facebook group, a gentleman would get in touch who'd seen a similar creature on the same road many years later. And he got in touch with me and he said, just a second, bear with me while I pull it up. Hi, Deborah. A lady wrote into you with an encounter with an ape man in the Stanley County Durham area. I saw it in the British Bigfoot Facebook group, and I was hoping to chat with you as I don't live too far away from the location that she had the encounter in. And there is another location along the same road where I used to ride my bicycle along between my girlfriend's house and where I used to live back then. It was on this certain part of the road that I always felt like I was being watched by something. It felt like something or someone I couldn't see was watching me from the shadows. And I knew it was there, but I could never see anything. But it would often be late at night when I would be returning home, and it was usually dark. And on one occasion, I did see something big standing behind a large tree near the graveyard and at the side of the church. I believe whatever it was, it had followed me as I rode along the whole of my journey until I got to the main road, and then the feeling was gone. I didn't have the feeling I was being watched at this point, as long as I stayed on that main part of the road. Now, on this particular night, I was on my way to my girlfriend's house, so it would have been around 8 p.m. And we both lived in County Durham, but in different towns, connected by a road. So I rode this route a lot. I used to use my cycle and go to my girlfriend's house, and she lived in Harlow in the Stanley area, and I would bike from my house in Concert. The area itself is on the coast-to-coast path in between Concert and Stanley, and it's mostly fields or woods along the main road, and it runs alongside farmland with a few dense patches of woodland. At the Concert side of the route, there is a church with a graveyard and a dense row of trees on the other side of the path, behind the church. As soon as I got onto that path, I got the feeling that I was being watched again. So I looked around everywhere and I couldn't see anything. So I just continued on with my journey. When I was on my way back home, it took me about 10 to 15 minutes to get to that church. And I heard a noise behind the trees, coming from where I felt something was watching me from. So I slowed down to get a good look. My eyes adjusted, and I saw a large, dark figure standing behind a tree, and it was roughly about 7 to 7.5 feet tall. I couldn't make out any facial features or fine details. It was dark, and the only light I had to see by was on the front of my bike. I didn't want to stick around, and I had no thoughts of approaching it to see what it was or to get a closer look, so I quickly left. Now, it would usually take about 10 minutes to get to the end of that path, and that night I did it in about 4 minutes. Now, as I said, this area has a lot of open land and trees, and close to the end of one section, there's an area that has about 6 short hairpin type turns, and these are about 10-foot high embankments that surround them on either side, and these turns go around, and they're big and they're deep, and they're deep enough that something or someone could hide in and not be seen until it was too late. And as I said, my encounter was on the coast-to-coast route between Concert and County Durham and Stanley County Durham. And that's quite a compelling set of accounts, shall we say. And there are other accounts around this. There's not too far away, there's an account called the Ebchester Eyes, and it's a similar account. I'm not going to go into it today, but it's a similar account where a gentleman sees eye shine and that worries him, but it's not close enough that we're going to say that it's on the same road. So we're just going to stick with those two sites in there in Stanley. And you think, well, that's great, that's Penn and that's Stanley, there won't be any more. But there is. It just seems to be that we get these little clusters, and I think it might be because you need a person actually to spot these creatures. So the ones that are out vastly in the wild, I don't think there's any people to make the report or to spot them, to be honest. But this is one that brings both of those sets of circumstances together. And believe it or not, it's in High Wycombe. And the first account in High Wycombe, just bear with me, I'm really sorry about this, I'm just getting it up. It's from a gentleman whose name is Mark Smith. He didn't go anonymous, he wrote this himself. He didn't come into me, I found it somewhere else. And he, as I say, his name's Mark Thompson. And he says, "My name is Mark Thompson, and I'd like to start by saying that this website is awesome. And I listen to it quite often. I now live in New Zealand, but originally I lived in England near London, in a town called High Wycombe. My encounter involves the legendary Green Man. And the Green Man is a legend of old and dates back thousands of years, just like the Native American stories of Sasquatch in America. In my case, I grew up next to the Chiltern Hills, which span across the southwest to the northwest of London. It's a very dense wooded area, and it has many legends of the Green Man, or his other names, the Hunter, Jack-o'-lantern, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Jack of the Green, Brown George. Some parts of the UK were not inhabited by humans, buildings, houses and things, until around about the 1800s. So forestry was quite big in England. About 6 years old when I had my encounter, a little like the lady in Stanley, who was only a young girl. It happened behind my house, where there was a wooded area that led out of my town towards the countryside. I was with some older boys who were carrying a ladder to erect a swing on a tree in the middle of the wooded area. There was a meadow full of long grass, but in a clearing in the woods. Once we'd erected the swing and had goofed around for a bit, the bigger boys had decided it was time to head home, and I was the last one to leave. I can remember following the bigger boys at a distance, maybe 20 yards ahead of me. I don't know what made me stop and look to my left, but I did. And on the edge of the meadow, beside a large tree, there was a huge figure. I remember craning my neck to look up at the creature's face. Now, I estimate this was 7 to 8 feet tall. This creature had lots of long hair draping down from its body, which was full of twigs and leaves, and it looked like what I now would call a ghillie suit. The face was huge, with deep set eyes, long thin lips were open, and it was smiling at me. I thought it was smiling, but the rest of its face wasn't. I now think it was showing its teeth. I was literally 10 feet away from this thing, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, and I caught the bigger boys. By this time, they were nearing the edge of the woods. I never told anyone about this sighting. For years afterwards, I'd have nightmares about this creature coming through the woods to get me. I'd have nightmares that this thing was in our house downstairs. When I laid on my pillow, my heart would beat, and the beat would sound like the footsteps coming to get me. It really did shake me up. I had no confidence growing up. I couldn't get this image out of my head. Now, I know other people have seen it, and they've seen this creature, and it's been at night, and they've mistaken it for a ghost. Now, not too far away, we say a short walk away, we have a gentleman who is camping wild in the hills, the Chiltern Hills, where the first gentleman was. And when he's actually filming, because he investigates the large cat sightings that you see in the UK. And he's one of those gentlemen that goes out and he lays traps. They lay sand traps in the hopes that any cat passing would leave a pug mark, which is a cast mark of the pad. They also leave hair traps, which is duct tape that's left with the sticky side out, placed along the brush so that any creature or cat walking through, their hair would catch on that, and that could be used for DNA. They also look for scat and stool samples. And another thing that this gentleman does is he sets up a wild camp. So we're not talking tent, things like that, the actual, bushcraft out there in the wild camp. And he'll stay out there for a number of days. And he also leaves a bait pile that he can see and check quite regularly. And he has a number of cameras out there as well. And he got in touch with me, and he's been following big cats for a great number of years. But he had an encounter with something that he couldn't work out. And as you'll hear, when you get hit with something that's thrown, There aren't many cats that can do that. And that's what got him interested and asked me if there were any sightings in the Chiltern Hills of something that could throw a log or a stone. And I sent him the map and he got back to me. And he said, I'm not sure what's happened, so I'm just going to relay it as it is. And that's how I'm going to relate it to you tonight. These are his words. And he says, hi, Deborah. I followed your page for a while now. And to be honest, I always found Bigfoot in the UK a bit of a push too far for me to believe. I'm very open-minded, and I'm quite well known in the big cat research in the southeast. I have camped out in many places overnight, and I've spent days out there in the woods in search of Britain's large cats. I know the diverse habitats in the UK, and I understand how a large, intelligent animal could stay hidden from people and thrive quite easily out there. I'm used to bushcrafting, and I'm used to nature structures. And even I am finding things that I cannot explain or put down to a cat, like the night in question. I am not claiming it was a creature or a wild man or anything like that. I am simply stating that some very strange things happened that night that I cannot explain. I'm curious though, because about 5 months ago, now that would put that January 2017, I had a very scary experience while solo camping wild. And I was camping over some baits in the valley, trying to film big cats. I'd set all this up earlier, and I was just waiting in the hope of luring something in. I'd settled down at camp by the fire. I was sat quietly, and I noticed I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I sensed it. But after a while, it seemed like something would approach me to within perhaps 20 metres, and then I'd hear the sound of them going back again. I could hear breaking sticks and ground movement. And I actually thought someone was throwing things in my direction because I could hear them landing. It really sounded like something was throwing branches to get my attention. Whatever it was, it stayed just out of sight of the firelight. There were no lights out there. And when I would shine my torch to the area I thought the sticks were coming from, nothing could be seen. Now, it was very strange. And I thought at first somebody was having me on. And it's a long walk there and back for a prank, to be honest. But I was certain someone was there. I actually would shout out to it. And I got that scared. I actually barked with my best dog impression in the hope of scaring away. I kept thinking it was roaches. And eventually it all stopped and went quiet. So I settled down for the night. Later that night, I heard a huge bang and a crash. I thought it was a gunshot. But thinking about it now, I think it was a tree limb being whacked against a tree. I got up and I ran out of there. I went back to get my stuff the next day. Camp was fine and nothing had been touched. I was camping in the Chilterns and I was in Mantles Wood near Missenden, Buckinghamshire. And I live very close to there, and I actually found a sighting of a hominid about 20 odd miles away from me. And he's asking me, do you have any sightings in the Chiltern Hills? And I could have a look around for you. But I have to say, I'll need some serious convincing, Deborah. I'm open-minded though, and I'm not ruling out anything. So do you have any sightings there? I actually filmed my camp for YouTube. So the noises are on the tape. And if you wanted to listen to that, I will put a link to you. I think you would have to go to his channel. Go to here's his website, bigcatsofchilternsweebly.com. So you have a try at that. If not, get in touch with me and I'll just pop you over there. I'll send you the link and pop you over there. So yeah, that's High Wycombe. Two very strange, both dark, seeing something that's out there that's incredibly upsetting or worrying or that gets you thinking that you can't shake it. And there are lots and lots of people like that out there. And we love to bring you these stories on the crypto realm. And as you know, Paranormal UK Radio has lots and lots of channels. We have the ghost channels. We have Paul Sinclair doing his UFOs, and he's often a guest on here. And he has a lot of strangeness that's going on in Yorkshire. And I'll get him onto the show to talk to you about that. But now I'd like to speak to you about Dundee. And you think, surely not. There cannot be any accounts in Dundee. Well, if any of you have heard of the television programme Finding Bigfoot, many of you may have heard of the Finding Bigfoot show. There's a gentleman on that, and his name's Cliff Barrickman. And he got in touch with me not too long ago and explained that a sighting had come into him in America. And he wanted me to have it because obviously he didn't take UK reports. And it had come in because of a newspaper report that had come out some years earlier in 1995. And this was by a gentleman. I'm just getting a drink of water, sorry. This was by Mark Luke, who's 46. And he's from the Edinburgh area. And it says he broke his silence for the first time after struggling to come to terms with what happened to him over a decade ago. Mark finally spoke to his mother about his experience 10 years earlier when he saw a Bigfoot roaming the Fife countryside. After reading about a similar experience in the Courier, Mr. Luke's mother persuaded him to come forward. So there must have been a newspaper article out there before 1995 that speaks of some kind of creature in this area in Fife. And if you know of that account or you have access to newspaper articles, if you could have a quick rummage, that would be wonderful. But Mr. Luke said he decided to speak after stumbling across an online article from last year on the Courier website while researching to try and explain his own encounter. Mr. Luke, who is a carer, said he spotted the tall, hairy, upright figure just off the Tay Road Bridge in 1995, whilst travelling to Dundee to fill in for night shift as he was a security guard. His sighting happened in the same area that a former civil servant from Fife reported seeing a creature at the Five Roads roundabout. Mr. Luke said, I had a similar encounter driving back to Edinburgh from night shift security in Dundee around 8 a.m. on the A92, driving south in the same area. I can remember a forest on both sides of the road with me, and I looked to my left to see a tall, dark shape standing 20 feet away from me in the trees. At first, I thought it was a man, but then it came towards me, and it was not a man. He must have been huge, some 8 to 10 feet tall, and really wide, it seemed. I was quite scared and confused, to be honest. Honestly, I put my foot down and carried on. I was doing about 60 miles an hour, and I was not going back to look back or to stop until he was way far behind me. It was dark under those trees, so it was very hard to see into there. I could see a shape, but no facial details. I told my mother after reading the story in the Courier, and she encouraged me to come forward and share what had happened. And Mr. Luke said, I am 90% sure that they are out there. I won't ever be 100% sure until I see a body or somebody catches something. Even seeing it with your own eyes does not make it seem possible. There are just too many unexplained things still out there. And he's correct in that, because on that same road, within a mile, we have the report that was sent to me. And that was called the Bigfoot Crossing the Road in Fife in August 2005. And as I say, this account was sent over to me by Cliff Barrickman of the BRFO, which is an American website that collects Bigfoot sightings, and they do a similar thing. They send out researchers into the area to talk to the witness, do an area check, but obviously, Fife was a little bit far for them to go, so we figured we'd help them out, as you do. And he says, in a very beautiful part of Scotland, less than a mile from the Tay estuary, and close to the A92, at the Five Roads roundabout, a gentleman who was driving encountered a strange, hairy, human-type figure, bordered by thick trees and foliage on both sides of the road. Now, the witness was driving home from work, and he was proceeding down the road as he travelled. He travelled this road many times before. This is his account in his own words. After navigating the Five Roads roundabout, I was driving home southbound on the A92 when my headlights picked out what I thought was a man standing by the left-hand side of the road. I could see his figure clearly, and as I approached, the figure stepped out in front of my car, and I naturally brought the car to a halt to avoid hitting this individual. Now, this person was a large, hairy, ape-like creature, which turned to look at the car as I approached. Its eyes gave out a shine, which was very noticeable, and it crossed the road in about 3 large strides. I felt uneasy, but I brought the car to a stop, and I put the window down. I could hear something crunching away in there, as if something or someone was clearly moving through that forest, and I had no torch with me to shine towards the sounds. There was an unpleasant smell in the air. I'd call it an odour. And I suddenly got the feeling I was being watched, and everything went quiet. Silence all around me. It was very unnerving. I then, shockingly, just continued to drive home. I didn't even realise I'd started to drive, and I didn't stop until I reached my house. Thinking back calmly now, this individual was well over 7 feet tall, and it had a dark brown colour. Its hair was of reasonable length, and I've never seen this again anywhere in Scotland. I only confided in my partner, to be honest. I thought these creatures existed in other areas in the world, but not here. I now unequivocally know that what I saw, and it's still clear in my mind as if it happened yesterday. There were rumours of sheep and cattle disturbances in that area, but I have heard of no sightings of large hairy creatures in that area of Scotland. I worked as a civil servant for many years, and I've experienced some crazy stuff, but I must admit that this was probably the craziest. Now, I actually went to Tay, believe it or not, to visit a different witness that lives, because the Tay River runs quite a long way through Scotland. If you're not from Scotland, you don't know. And not too far away from there, we have the well-known Carmely accounts. And I do have an account that I'm going to bring to you in a couple of weeks, because I'm going to... there are 3 accounts now at Carmely. There are 2 that came forward from Charmaine Fraser. She was a lady who saw a very academic lady, a lady of education. But when she was a young child, she was about 8 years old, she was at her grandparents' house in the middle of what is Forestry Commission land. There's a quarry there. And she sees what she describes as an 8-foot, hairy, dark creature reaching up to the branch of a tree. And there's also an account there of a strange figure in the middle of the road at dusk when they're in the car and they're driving. There's a family tale of a ginger bra, a kind of creature that lives out there in the woods. There's a howl when they're out picking raspberries, and somebody else, the adults actually hear the howl and they just, shrug it off. And a gentleman came forward this week with an account from this area and said that I've seen something at Carmely Quarry, and I wanted to get in touch with you so you could pass it on to Charmaine. So I will be bringing you those. And also next week we have Mike, who does the Werewolf Diaries, and he'll be discussing some of the very, very strange accounts that come in the UK that are canid or dogman. Today we're just going to do the creature reports, and I'll keep going with that. As we like to do on the Crypto Realm, bring you very strange things. I hope you've all got a cup of tea and you're sat and you're relaxed. We've got a couple of more to go now. But on the Paranormal Radio Network, we like to bring you tales or accounts or experiences, whatever word you would like to use, that happen to ordinary members of the public out there. And we have something like that now from the Pentland Hill. So this is not too far away from either the Carmely accounts or the accounts on the Tay Road at Dundee. And it does seem to give the impression that something is moving around out there. And the reason I mentioned Charmaine was because, like some of us witnesses, there comes a time in your life where you have to either put this to bed once and for all, or you have to search for answers. And that's what Charmaine decided to do. So she spent a number of years going around trying to find other witnesses to similar things. And she actually did. And what she did was she spoke to a nurse. And the nurse recounts a tale told to her by her brother about 16 years ago by an activity leader who was running his group out there. And the person in question used to be involved with the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme and ran a number of outdoor activities and spent a lot of his personal time outdoors. He was camping one night near Woodland when he'd gone away from his group of friends to relieve himself in the bushes. He saw something large and black moving on two legs and got such a fright he fell over a wall and ended up on his ass in the woods. He apparently looked into black cat sightings for a while afterwards to see if that explained what he saw. But he came to the conclusion that a cat that size would not have been able to walk on two legs. The location of this sighting is somewhere in the Pentland Hills near Edinburgh and would have happened around 1998. Unfortunately, her brother could not remember the guy's name, but if he ever comes back to him, she'll let me know. It's unfortunate that this account is third hand. It seems to have some of the hallmarks of a genuine sighting, Charmaine said. The area is interesting, as there's another documented sighting from the late 80s in the Bathgate Hills, which is about 10 miles north of this general location. And the lady herself said that she had heard a few strange things from people when doing camping activities in Scotland, such as tents being collapsed in the middle of the night, and suggested maybe approaching hikers and camping forums, and that might be a good place to get some of the stories. And that's exactly what Charmaine did. And just a little walk away, and I mean a little walk away, we have in the Pentland Hills an experience by a gentleman called Gary Richards, who actually got in touch with me through my website, which is Report a Bigfoot Sighting in the UK. And Gary was camping in the Pentland Hills. And he says, first of all, thank you for allowing me to share my experience. What follows is my true account of what happened to myself and my friend Andy in late August, early September of 2011. Now, he attached a map to this encounter. He was so determined to get across what had happened to him and to make me understand, because a lot of the witnesses feel like that. They want you to understand what it was like, where they walked, where it happened. And the map shows, there's a picture of the reservoir with a red map X marking the spot where he was camping. And unfortunately, obviously, I can't show it to you on the show. But he says, late August, early September 2011, I was out with my mate, and I've been an avid camper most of my adult life. I have a small group of close friends that I go into the Pentland Hills with. We usually go to the south of Edinburgh, in the Greenbelt. But on this occasion, it was just me and my mate Andy. And the focus of the trip was to get our camping spot just northeast of the Bonally Reservoir. And we just wanted to enjoy the rare warm weather and have a couple of cans, a fire, some food, and enjoy being in nature for a few days. It's just what we like to do. Now, the hike from the bus stop in Bonally is quite arduous. And as you're climbing several hundred feet in all around about 2 miles up, we had 2 full packs each full of gear and supplies, which took well over 2 hours, as neither of us were very fit. We got up to our usual spot around 7 p.m, and our camping spot's to the left of the public footpath, heading southwest through the hill range, about 250 yards from the path. And we always camp in the same place, right at the end of the tree line, which is down a man-made embankment. Now, this spot is great because there's a little wind there and a small stream for fresh water. And directly to the south is the start of a very dense pine forest, which is pitch black even in the height of daylight. To the southwest is open land that leads to a very scenic and beautiful reservoir, which is surrounded by pine trees. To the northwest, there is a very small pine forest, which I would estimate is only about 2 hectares. And at the bottom of this area is where we set up camp. We both had one-man tents, which we set around about 3 meters apart, with the entrances facing one another. We gathered firewood from the forest floor using dead dry wood, and we built a fire about 5 metres due southwest of the camp, so embers wouldn't set fire to our tents. After having a couple of cans and some food, it was already starting to get dark. We planned to get up early and walk up to the triangulation pillar to watch the sunrise, which neither of us had done before, and we really wanted to do it. So it was only about 9:30 when we shut the campsite down and entered our tents. And with a hot drink each in hand, we chatted about life and how much we enjoy nature for about an hour. By this time it was dark, but there was a dull glow of the fire, and it did provide a small amount of light. I didn't bother having a torch in my tent, but Andy did. He then decided he'd read for a bit, and I was so tired I decided to just get some sleep. Andy left his tent wide open, bug screen and all, but I closed my tent off completely and turned over to sleep. Only around 5 minutes had passed since I turned over to get some sleep when a very strange sensation started to come over me. It wasn't tiredness, more like a light-headedness, a weightlessness. And then here's where things get really weird. My mind was yanked out of my body, like some giant vacuum cleaner had sucked me out. And I found myself floating about 12 feet above my tent looking down. And this was incredibly upsetting and unsettling experience. And from investigations I've done since, this is called an involuntary out-of-body experience. As I was floating there, my attention was drawn to the dense pine forest to the southwest of the camp, where this very tall, dark figure started to emerge from the tree line. I remember thinking to myself, what the is going on? I watched this massive thing walk straight past the fire and walk between the two tents and into the small forest to the northeast, only about 50 yards from our camp. My mind, awareness, yanked again, being pulled in that direction that the creature was going. At this point, I was filled with a mixture of dread, confusion, and curiosity. The creature walked into the tree line and I followed. When in the small pine forest, I watched this figure walk another 50 yards and come to a stop. And I kind of floated down to it. So I was about 10 feet away from it, mid-torso. This figure, creature, turned around and looked straight at me, completely silent and still. It was difficult to tell scale, but it looked massive, but not bulky or fat, more athletically built, all covered in black hair, so black. The facial features were hard to make out, but it had this sort of cone-shaped head and a deep-set black eyes. It stood on 2 legs and had very long arms. I don't know why I did this, but I tried to reach out to it for some reason. And I saw my hand stretch out in front of me and move slowly towards its chest. As I moved closer, I focused where my hand was going and looked nowhere else. My hand touched its chest, and I could feel its thick, coarse hair. I looked up and into its eyes, and it stared straight back into mine. And I didn't feel afraid anymore. There was an overwhelming sense of peace that seemed to move right through me. And that moment, I was sucked back into my body, like I had been shot through a gun. Now, before I go any further, it's important to say that I realise that this sounds fucking nuts. And if it wasn't for what happened next, I would have just brushed it off as a crazy dream. When I came back into my body, I snapped back to consciousness. I was soaking with a cold sweat. And to my utter surprise, my mate Andy was shouting and screaming in his tent. I quickly opened up my tent to make sure he was okay. And what I saw was a wreck of a man staring back at me. He was as white as a ghost and said to me, "Did you just see that thing? That thing just walked straight through our fucking camp, man." It was at that moment I realised that I had not been dreaming. And that's when panic set in. We have never vacated a campsite so quickly in our lives, and we were down that hill in record-breaking time. We talked very briefly about what happened when we got back to Benalla. But when I told him what happened to me, he lost his, and we just about had a breakdown. After that day, I have never been back, and Andy and I have never spoken again. So there you have it, Deborah. Like I said, it's not your usual encounter, I would guess. And if you need any more info, please get in touch. That sounds like absolutely harrowing. To be in a situation where you not only see a creature or experience a creature in the normal sense of the world while you're walking with your feet planted on the ground. Can you imagine what it would be like to be yanked out of your body and see something? Now, not too far away, a very, very short walk away, we have something that happened on December the 6th, 2014. It happened around 6 p.m. And believe it or not, it was by the city bypass, which is the west of the city. And this was reported by a work colleague in February 2015. And he reported it to Charmaine. And he describes driving home from watching a football match in Falkirk. And it was Hibs versus Falkirk away. That puts the date at the 6th of December 2014. He was with his 2 teenage children and a friend. And they were driving on the city bypass near Edinburgh at around 6 p.m. when he saw what he described as something that looked like a cross between a chimp and a gorilla. It was moving on all fours along a strip of embankment just under the Calder roundabout on the west side of the city's bypass. He stated, it was moving at some speed. It seemed like it was scared, and it was pretty big. He estimates it was around 4 feet high at the shoulder when it was on all fours. He states that he turned to his daughter, who was in the front passenger seat, and asked if she had seen it too, and she said that she had. He did not see its face, just the shape of it. Now, this location is highly unusual, and there are no reports of escaped chimps or any other primates at the time from Edinburgh Zoo or the Wildlife Park in Stirlingshire. And it's very close to the east side of the Pentland Hills Range, where reports of howls and sightings have been documented previously. Now, the person who reported this was good enough to show me exactly where it took place. It's a strip of land on the edge of the bypass, and not what you would expect for a typical location. However, Charmaine says, I have no doubts as to the credibility of this witness. I've personally known him for about 5 years, and he's not prone to fabricating stories. I will try and speak to his daughter if the opportunity arises or presents itself in any way. And as you see, that's another strange account. It just continues like that. And I'm sure as the months go on, and we discuss more of them, don't worry, I won't be bringing you them week in, week out. You probably get sick to death of them. We'll just do the odd show where we will get a group of sightings together. And if you're in an area, let the team at Paranormal UK Radio know. Pop along there to the Facebook page and say, have you, is any of this happening in my area? And I will make sure that the show wraps around that. But as I say, we've done quite a few today, haven't we? We've been to Penn, and we've heard about the Penn sightings there, and the strange accounts on the road in Stanley and High Wycombe and Durham and the Pentland Hills. Now let's go further south, and we'll go to the Hackney Marsh. And I don't think we've got time to do all of the Hackney Marsh accounts, so I'd like to condense it by saying there is a very strange photograph out there called the Hackney Marsh Bear. And when it hit the papers, there was a gentleman who was in the pop group I don't know how we say it, Cooler Shaker, I think. Not someone that I know of. And he said, oh, no, it's just my dog. I took my dog for a walk, and it was me with this dog, which everybody said, oh, cool, that's that problem solved. We don't have to do any more further research into this. But I thought, I'm going to have a look and see if there are any other, not that I didn't believe him, he might have been out there with his dog that day, But I thought, it's what I do. I'll have a look and I'll see if there's anything else that I can see that's in that area. And I did manage to find a range of accounts from the 80s until the late 2000s. So it's either an incredibly old dog or he's had a number of these dogs. But I'm not sure. I think, make up your mind for yourself kind of thing. But I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what he's actually in. And you're thinking, Hackney Marsh, there's no way that there are any accounts at Hackney Marsh. Now, right next to Spitalfields, believe it or not, we have one of the Hackney Marsh bear accounts. And this is the one where Cooler Shaker said, oh, that was my dog. And this happened in 2012. And it was a university student called Helen Murray. And she took the snaps while out for a stroll near the dense woodland. And it's close to the old River Lee. So if you just put into Google the Hackney Marsh bear, the photographs will pop up. And you see a dark creature that's kind of covered in what doesn't look like fur. It looks like hair, but, that's just my opinion. And she said she was stopped in her tracks by this unknown animal, which was larger than a person and covered in shaggy black fur. And she says, I tried to stay calm as I wasn't sure what kind of animal it was, or if it was even alive, she said. I had my phone ready to call 999, and this creature moved off. Somehow, I managed to take a couple of pictures before it ran. I managed to get away, but I was scared out to death. Now, a spokesman for the Hackney Police said there have been no other reports of sightings, and experts at London Zoo said that the pictures were not clear enough for them to comment. Now, the photographs have revived memories of the unexplained case of a bear reportedly sighted on the marshes in 1981. 50 police officers, army marksmen, and a helicopter were drafted in to search the area, but the beast was never found. Officers at the time stressed that people who'd seen the animal were not hoaxers, although they admitted that they could have been hoaxed. And 2 bear carcasses had previously been found nearby in the River Lee, and it remains a mystery as to how they got there. And on the same marsh, on the same stretch of land, we actually have that report, and it was 1981, and it was 4 young boys who came across a beast they described as a giant, great, growling, hairy thing as they were playing in the thick snow on the marsh. 13-year-old Tommy Murray was scared stiff by the beast, which allegedly raised up on its hind legs and growled. The boys scattered in horror, all slipping upon a white blanket. The shocking encounter came just hours after the friends had stumbled across a mysterious set of impressions in the snow that seemed to have been made by a large animal they could not identify. Soon after the incident, as we said, 50 police with dogs and marksmen and helicopters went out, and there was no sign of the animal. And the chief inspector said at the time, although I didn't see the boys myself, I'm reliably informed that they were very frightened by what they saw, and they were not hoaxers. 3 sets of bear-like prints were found, 1 batch on an island which had a perimeter fence and a lock gate. However, despite the watered-down theories of the group, something weird was definitely going on. A year previous, as we stated earlier, 2 bear carcasses were discovered in the River Lee, and nobody has ever been able to trace where those bears had come from. But would it surprise you that if you just nip to Wanstead Flats, and people who live in the area know Wanstead Flats, that there's also an account there, and that came in 2008, and I will bring that to you in another time, because this area is absolutely full of very strange creature reports. So if you want to hear them, just tune into the Crypto Realm on Paranormal UK Radio with me, Deborah Hatswell, and we will talk about the strange creature reports you find here in the UK. Now, you can find the Crypto Realm on Podbean, iTunes, and Spreaker, and Blog Talk Radio, I apologise. It wouldn't be my show if there wasn't a mistake. Stitcher, YouTube, and Facebook. And I'd like to thank you all very much for tuning in, even though Ron couldn't be here with us, and I think most of you tune in for Ron. And he will be back with us at some point, I'm sure, but he's incredibly busy at the moment, so I'm just going to try and plough through things on my own. As I said, we have a wonderful set of guests coming up for you. We have some strange Sasquatch hair, and we have werewolf journals. So until next time, thank you all very much, and have a wonderful night. Good night.